Why was everyone suddenly quiet when she walked in? The cafeteria at Anderson Air Base buzzed with noise a second ago, metal trays clattering, laughter echoing off steel walls, the familiar scent of jet fuel and coffee mixing like every other morning. Then the door opened, and silence rippled through the room as if someone had turned the volume down on life itself. Maya Rowe, mid-twenties, civilian badge on her chest, and a scar that ran along her jaw like a lightning strike frozen in skin. The laughter didn't stop, it only changed, softer now, meaner. "That's the one who fried the nav system last month," someone whispered. Another voice, loud, confident, cruel. "Careful, boys. She might drop a wrench and take out the whole wing again." Snickers, forks clinking. A few eyes tracked her across the room like she was a live grenade. Maya didn't react, not even a flinch. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who had learned long ago that calm was armor. She reached the far corner, set down her tray, aligned her utensils with surgical care and began to eat, alone as always. Outside the window, the Pacific shimmered like a blade under the morning sun. The flag whipped in the wind, and behind all the whispers, a single thought hung unspoken. She doesn't belong here. They didn't know how wrong they were. The next morning, the hum of turbines rolled across the base like a pulse. Inside Hangar 12, Maya worked beneath the belly of an F-15, her hands steady, her focus surgical. She didn't speak, didn't look up, didn't waste a breath. Around her, the same jokes floated between young mechanics like smoke. "She's the contractor who botched that calibration, right? Yeah, no idea why they still keep her. Probably some diversity quota." Laughter. Then silence again when she moved, when the quiet itself became a warning. She didn't respond, she never did. Her wrench turned once, precise, measured, and the diagnostic light stabilized. To them, she was a civilian tech with a limp and a scar, nothing more. But to those who looked closer, if anyone ever had, they might have noticed something else. The way she stood at attention when the flag rose every morning. The way her hands folded napkins into perfect triangles, the kind used for field maps. The faint tan line on her wrist, where a soldier's watch used to sit. Once she'd worn the same uniform they did. Once she'd carried rank, Staff Sergeant Air Force. 3 deployments. And 1 mission that never made it home. A helicopter crash. Fire. Metal twisted into the dirt of Afghanistan. She pulled 2 men out before the explosion. The third, she still heard his voice when it was quiet enough. After the medevac, she didn't talk about it again, not to anyone. Now she worked in silence, day after day, rebuilding machines so others could fly, and no one knew what it cost her to keep going. Captain Blake Monroe was the kind of officer who filled silence with sound. Tall, sharp, mid-30s, the mirrored aviators, the confident stride. A man who believed volume meant leadership and mockery meant control. He noticed her that morning, crouched beneath the fuselage, wires spread like arteries in front of her. "Hey, Rowe," he called, voice echoing off aluminum. "Try not to blow this one up too, all right?" The nearby techs chuckled. Maya didn't even turn her head. "Yes, sir," she said softly. Monroe frowned. He'd expected an excuse, maybe defensiveness. Instead, he got calm obedience, a kind that unsettled him. He didn't know why she bothered him. Maybe it was her silence, or the way she seemed to carry discipline she no longer owed anyone. She wasn't in uniform anymore, but something in her still moved like a soldier. From his tinted office window, Wing Commander Aaron Doyle watched the exchange. 50-something, calm, a man who'd seen enough to know what mattered and what didn't. "That one's not new to this," he said quietly to his adjutant. The young officer shrugged. "She's a contractor, sir, civilian tech." Doyle didn't look away. "Maybe, but she works like someone who's seen things they don't teach in manuals." He wasn't wrong. Days turned into weeks. Same routine, same whispers. Maya arrived before sunrise, logged every calibration, every part replaced, ate lunch alone. Sometimes she'd sketch wiring diagrams on napkins during breaks, tracing systems like she was rebuilding something no one else could see. The younger airmen found her silence threatening in a way they couldn't name. She acts like she's on a secret mission, one joked. Nah, another said. She's just one of those quiet types who think they're smarter than the rest of us. They laughed louder this time, because laughter is easier than respect. Maya heard it all, every word. But she'd learned long ago, silence carries its own kind of power. That night after everyone left, the hangar was a cathedral of shadows. Only one work light glowed near the center, and under it, Maya tightened the last bolt on a radar array. When she finished, she wiped her hands clean, aligned her tools perfectly, and stared at the aircraft's insignia. It wasn't the same model that went down years ago, but close enough. Her lips parted. "You'd have liked this one, Lopez," she whispered. Her voice barely rose above the hum of the turbines outside. She stood there for a long moment, framed in the half-light, the scar on her jaw catching the faint reflection of the flag fluttering through the window. Some people wear their past like a medal. Others carry it quietly, in scars and silence. Maya Rowe was never hiding. She was remembering. By the third week, the jokes became background noise, part of the hangar itself, the metallic laughter of men who hadn't seen the things she had. A young crew chief called out across the break room, "Hey, Rowe, which screwdriver took you down?" Snickers. A few eyes darted to her scar, then away again. Maya said nothing. She folded her napkin into a triangle, then another, then slid it under her cup to steady it on the warped tabletop. The silence that followed wasn't respect. It was dismissal. The kind that says, "You're not worth another joke." Outside, the wind howled across the flight line. The flag snapped against the sky. At exactly 700, Maya stopped walking, turned toward it and saluted. Not out of protocol, instinct. A nearby airman whispered, "She's not even in uniform." Maya didn't correct him. Some habits aren't meant to be unlearned. Later that day, Monroe passed through the mess hall, trailing confidence and noise. He spotted her sketching on a napkin again and smirked. "Still designing planes, Rowe. You planning to build one this time?" A few laughed around him. Maya looked up once, her eyes calm, unflinching. "No, sir," she said quietly, "just remembering." He froze just for a second. Because there was something in her voice, a gravity that didn't fit her civilian badge. But instead of asking, he laughed it off. He always laughed things off. He left and she went back to sketching. The outlines of an aircraft drawn from memory, each curve precise, like the memory of a fallen friend. That night she worked late again. She always did. When the world grew quiet, she could almost hear the mountains again, the roar of rotors, the scream of metal tearing apart, the voice in her headset going silent mid-sentence. She took a slow breath, steady in, out. Then she set the wrench down, parallel to the mat, and whispered again into the quiet. "You'd have liked this one." The lights flickered once, the wind rose outside. The next morning began like any other, but something subtle had shifted. The air was heavier, the glances longer. She didn't know yet that a test was coming. That the same people who mocked her would soon watch her stand where few ever could. For now she just worked. Tightened bolts, checked diagnostics, logged details. But there was one thing she hadn't told them. Not yet. She wasn't on base just to repair planes. She was there to remember how to stop one from burning. And soon, too soon, they'd all find out what that meant. Soft music rise, reflective tone. Because sometimes, The quietest person in the room is the only one who remembers what fire sounds like. And when the smoke comes again, silence won't be weakness. It'll be command. Why did she never speak back? That was the question Lewis couldn't stop asking. He joined Anderson Air Base less than a year ago, fresh out of training, still believing discipline was louder than compassion. He'd laughed once at one of the jokes about her. Just once. It hadn't felt good. Something about her silence made the laughter taste wrong afterward, like chewing metal. Every morning he saw her before dawn, walking the line between hangars with a limp so faint you might miss it unless you were looking. Always the same. Tool bag slung over one shoulder, hair tied back, eyes fixed straight ahead. Never early enough to see her arrive. Never late enough to see her leave. The others called it obsession. Lewis called it ritual. That morning, he found her crouched under the wing of a fighter, half her body swallowed by open panels. The soft glow of diagnostic screens washed her face in pale blue light. The scar caught the reflection like lightning frozen under skin. He hesitated, hands in his pockets. "Morning, ma'am, Ms. Rowe." She didn't look up. "Morning, airman." Her tone was even, clipped, but not cold. The kind of voice that didn't waste energy on words it didn't need. He shifted awkwardly, trying to seem helpful without being in the way. "Need a second pair of hands." She passed him a torque wrench without looking. "Hold pressure here, slow." He did. The metal vibrated faintly under his palm. She adjusted a coupling, watched the readout stabilize, then nodded once. "Good." Her voice softened just enough for him to notice. "Thank you." He nodded, though she wasn't looking. "Yes, ma'am." It wasn't a long conversation, but it stayed with him all day. By mid-afternoon, the Pacific sun had turned the tarmac into liquid light. Jets shimmered like ghosts ready to fly. Inside Hangar 12, the day shifted rhythm again, the same routine that defined every hour of every shift. Except for Maya. Her rhythm never changed. She worked through noise and through silence, through laughter and through pity. The others took lunch. She ate at her bench. They wiped sweat and complained. She just kept going. Her left knee locked sometimes when she knelt too long, but she ignored it. Monroe watched from across the bay, coffee in hand, sunglasses reflecting everything but emotion. He told himself she annoyed him because she broke rhythm, because she made the rest of them feel loud and sloppy by comparison. But deep down, he knew it wasn't annoyance. It was something else, something like recognition he didn't want to admit. When he'd first joined the Air Force, before rank and ego built armor around him, he'd known people like her. The ones who didn't speak much, who didn't brag, who just got it done. The kind of soldiers who never needed attention because the mission itself was enough. But she wasn't supposed to be one of those. She was a contractor. A mistake if the rumors were true. He sipped his coffee, bitterness biting his tongue. Still pretending to be a soldier, he muttered under his breath. But the words didn't sound as convincing as they used to. That night, a storm rolled in from the ocean. Rain battered the hangar roof like drumfire. Maya stayed late again, the only light a single lamp reflecting off aluminum skin. She'd been recalibrating a flight computer for hours, careful as a surgeon, patient as a monk. When Monroe stepped in, his boots echoed through the cavernous space. "Working overtime?" he asked. "Diagnostics misfired," she replied without turning. "I'm correcting the offset." He leaned against a crate, arms folded. "You ever stop?" "When it's fixed." The answer was simple. It wasn't sarcasm. That somehow made it harder to argue with. He watched her work in silence, trying to find a flaw. He couldn't. Every motion had purpose. No hesitation, no wasted reach. Her left hand steadied the board while her right traced a line of code on the screen. It reminded him of combat drills, repetition until movement became instinct. He finally spoke. You really think this place is worth that much effort? Maya paused, just long enough for him to notice. Then she said, every place that holds people trying to go home is worth the effort. He frowned, not sure how to respond. There was no pride in her tone, no speech, no performance, just quiet conviction. The kind you only learn after seeing what happens when things aren't fixed. She powered down the board and started reassembling the panel. Monroe stayed longer than he'd meant to. He didn't say another word. The next morning, the jokes started earlier. They always did when work piled up. "Hey, Ro," a crew chief shouted from across the hangar. "You recalibrating or redecorating that bird?" Another laughed. "She's probably writing it poetry." Maya ignored them as always. Lewis didn't. He turned sharply. "Knock it off." The laughter died halfway through a breath. The crew chief raised an eyebrow. "Relax, rookie, we're just talking." Lewis muttered, "Then talk smarter." They looked at him like he'd grown a second head. He went back to work, ears burning. Across the room, Maya didn't say anything, but when he risked a glance, he saw the faintest nod. Not approval, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. It was enough. Around noon, Monroe called for an all-crew check on the navigation systems. "Let's make sure the civilians can keep up," he joked loudly, and the laughter rolled again. He pointed to Maya. "Ro, you're up. Recalibrate the EGI on 427. She didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." The hangar quieted as she climbed the maintenance stand. Dozens of eyes followed her movements, waiting for her to fail. Monroe checked his watch. 15 minutes. Someone near the back whispered, "She'll need 30. A few chuckles. She didn't react. She placed her cart precisely where she wanted it, checked the ground, verified the tether. She didn't move like a contractor. She moved like someone trained to do this in places where failure meant lives. "Timer's running," Monroe said, his tone sharp. She started. No wasted motion. No fumbling. Her hands danced over the panel with a grace that didn't fit the noise surrounding her. Lewis stood closer now, watching. He saw what no one else did. The way her fingers checked a latch, not because the checklist said so, but because the resistance felt wrong. The way she paused between commands as if listening to the machine breathe. At 10 minutes, Monroe smirked. "Any day now, Ro." She ignored him. She pressed 2 keys, accessed a secondary diagnostic screen most techs forgot existed. She made a correction so small it looked like nothing. The system blinked red once. Then green. "Stable." 5 minutes, someone muttered, disappointed there. Be no explosion, no mistake to mock. Maya closed the panel, wrote a single line on her log. "Fault isolated, alignment complete." She turned. "Jets ready for sortie, sir." Monroe blinked. He'd had a speech ready, a half-compliment wrapped in condescension. But for the first time, words failed him. "Guess even civilians can follow instructions," he said at last. It came out hollow. The hangar didn't laugh this time. Maya nodded once, coiled her cable neatly, and walked away. Lewis watched her go, throat tight, something burning in his chest he couldn't name. Respect maybe, or shame. Maybe both. But success didn't end the whispers. It made them sharper. By that evening the story had changed. She got lucky. Monroe basically fixed it for her. Timer was generous. They needed the myth of her incompetence more than they needed the truth of her skill. Monroe overheard them. For the first time, he didn't laugh. He wanted to correct them, but his pride got in the way. He hated that he'd started this fire and now didn't know how to put it out. That night, Maya stayed late again, finishing what others hadn't. The hangar lights dimmed until only her small work lamp remained, a lonely sun over her world of steel and silence. She traced the edge of her scar unconsciously, the way you might trace the edge of a memory that still burns. Her reflection looked back at her from a polished panel, older, calmer, but still fighting ghosts. She whispered something too soft to hear. Maybe a name, maybe an apology, maybe both. Then she shut the panel, logged the repair, and left the hangar as rain began to fall. Lua stayed behind later than usual, finishing his reports. The sound of rain softened everything, voices, thoughts, even guilt. When he passed by her workbench, something caught his eye. Her tool bag sat open beside her stool, edges worn from years of use. On the inside flap, a patch glimmered faintly under the lamp light, an eagle clutching lightning bolts, embroidered in silver thread. He frowned, he didn't recognize it. Not standard issue, not maintenance crew. When he tried to look closer, she returned, and he quickly turned away, pretending to organize paperwork. She packed her tools, zipped the bag shut. The patch disappeared into the shadows. Later in his dorm room, curiosity got the better of him. He searched the symbol online. His breath caught when he found the match. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers. He sat back slowly, the glow of the screen painting his face pale. He whispered, "No way." The next morning, when Maya walked across the tarmac, the wind tugged gently at her jacket. The sunrise painted the world gold. For a moment, Lewis thought she looked almost peaceful. But as she reached the hangar door, she paused, eyes lifting toward the flag whipping in the wind. Her hand twitched slightly, an old habit, then fell back to her side. He wondered if she still dreamed about Afghanistan. If the scar on her jaw hurt when it rained. If the silence was her armor or her punishment. He didn't know yet. None of them did. But soon they would. Because somewhere above the Pacific horizon, a storm was forming, one that would strip away every rank, every rumor, every lie, and leave only the truth standing in its place. And when it came, the quiet woman they'd mocked would be the only one who knew what to do. Soft music fades in, somber, reflective. Some people spend their whole lives talking about courage. Others show it in silence. And sometimes that silence saves everyone. How real did a simulation have to get before people realized it wasn't pretend anymore? That Thursday morning began like any other, humid air, the metallic hum of turbines, and the smell of jet fuel mixing with salt from the Pacific. But under the usual rhythm, something electric moved through the base. Orders had gone out at dawn, a full emergency readiness drill. Wing Commander Aaron Doyle wanted realism this time. No rehearsed responses, no scripts, just instinct. "Run it like the real thing," he'd told Captain Monroe. "Fuel leak, avionics failure, containment procedures. Let's see who can think on their feet." Monroe had nodded sharply. "Copy that, sir." Doyle had paused, watching him, and Captain include the civilian tech, Rowe. Monroe's jaw had tightened. He didn't argue. "Yes, sir." By early afternoon, Hangar 12 looked like a movie set waiting for a director to yell action. Emergency carts stood by. Fire suppression crews waited near the exits. A medic unit idled outside. The mood was light, too light. Mechanics laughed. Pilots swapped bets about how long before someone tripped the alarm for real. Lewis moved between tool racks, double-checking pressure gauges. He caught sight of Maya at her bench, tightening a relay coupling. Her sleeves were rolled up, hair tied back, expression unreadable as always. "Rowe," Monroe called across the hangar, voice echoing. "You're on power systems, simulation only. Don't go frying anything for real." A few laughs followed. "Yes, sir," she said simply. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. To everyone else, it was a drill. To her, drills had never been just anything. At 13:06, the klaxon blared. Simulation start. The sound punched through the hangar, sharp, rhythmic, too familiar for Maya to mistake for anything else. The team scattered into position, running checklists, calling out system statuses. The air filled with motion and noise. Lewis moved fast, his hands shaking a little despite the training. Monroe barked orders, confident, commanding, loud enough to drown doubt. Hydraulic leak on port side, mock failure. One tech read off the sheet. Good, Monroe said. Containment teams move. Maya was already in motion, disconnecting power leads, verifying safety locks. The first 10 minutes went perfectly. Then the second alarm sounded. At first, no one reacted. It was part of the drill, or so they thought. But then came the sound, a sharp pop beneath the belly of the jet. Everyone froze. Another pop, then smoke, real smoke. Gray, curling, thick with the acid tang of burning hydraulic fluid. Someone yelled, "Wait, that's not part of the script." The acrid scent hit the air, a hiss followed. A thin tongue of flame licked out from under the aircraft. For half a second, the hangar just stared. No one moved. Monroe's voice cut through, suddenly uncertain. Kill the sim, kill it. But confusion spread faster than orders. Some froze, some hesitated, others looked around, waiting for permission to act. Maya didn't wait. She dropped her clipboard, sprinted toward the smoke. "Row, stop," Monroe barked. She didn't. Her voice came back through the rising noise, sharp, trained, commanding in a way no one on base had ever heard from her. "Controlled burn, kill the master circuit now." Someone stammered, "Do I?" "Now," she shouted. The hangar lights flickered. The power to the jet died with a heavy thunk. The hiss softened but didn't stop. Maya dropped to one knee, sliding under the fuselage without hesitation, her movements precise, deliberate, practiced. Lewis ran toward her. "You can't go under there, it's hot, not lethal," she called back. "Hydraulic seal breach. I need airflow, not panic." Her tone was pure command, short, clipped, absolute. Monroe's mouth opened, but the words wouldn't come. He was still processing what was happening, and she was already 3 steps ahead. Under the jet, she worked by instinct, hand on a manual cut-off valve. The metal was red-hot, the air choking. Her left hand trembled, old damage, half memory, half pain. She bit it back and turned the latch. The line hissed, venting pressure. Lewis crouched near the edge of the smoke, trying to see her. "What do you need?" "Rags, CO2 hose, and someone shut that damn alarm." He ran, came back with everything she'd asked for. She vented the line, kept the temperature stable until the last hiss faded to steam, then crawled out, coughing, covered in soot and sweat. "Pressure stabilized," she said, voice hoarse but steady. "Seals cooked, tanks safe." The base fire officer arrived seconds later, everyone clear. Maya's eyes flicked back toward the jet's tail. Not everyone. Before anyone could stop her, she ducked under again. "Row," Monroe shouted, his voice breaking between authority and fear. This time she didn't answer. A young tech, Private Nguyen, was pinned between a fallen cable reel and the hydraulic cart that had toppled when the alarm went off. He was conscious barely. Maya braced one arm under the reel, gritting her teeth, using her shoulder to lift while her legs shook with strain. She pushed until the metal shifted, then grabbed Nguyen's vest strap and hauled him backward, inch by inch. Lewis ran to help, but by the time he reached them, she'd already dragged the kid halfway out. "You're okay, Airman," she said, breath ragged. "You're okay." They stumbled into the open air together, the smoke curling behind them like an exorcised ghost. Monroe rushed forward, face pale. "My God, how did you?" "I've done it before," she said quietly. The words landed like an echo from a world they didn't know existed. Medics moved in, taking Nguyen. He'd live. Burns, bruises, nothing worse. The others stood frozen, their laughter from weeks ago now a hollow memory hanging between them. The alarms fell silent, replaced by the soft sound of rain outside, and the hiss of steam dissipating from the concrete. Wing Commander Doyle arrived minutes later, flanked by 2 officers. His eyes swept the scene. The scorched floor, the smoke, the exhausted faces. "What happened here?" Monroe straightened, tried to gather his voice. "Simulation turned real, sir. Hydraulic rupture. We contained it." "Who led the response?" Monroe hesitated. "Civilian tech, sir, Maya Rowe." Doyle's gaze shifted. There she was, standing beside the jet, face streaked with soot, right hand wrapped in a makeshift bandage, her posture still straight. He studied her quietly. "Led the response," he repeated softly. "Yes, sir," Monroe said, lowering his head. Doyle approached her, boots echoing against the wet floor. "You all right?" "I'm fine, sir," she replied. "You burned your hand." She flexed her fingers slightly. "I've had worse." He looked at her a long time. Something in her tone, something about the way she said "sir," pulled at an old memory, but he didn't ask, not yet. "Good work," he said finally, his voice softened. "Get that hand looked at." "Yes, sir." He turned to leave, then paused. "Captain Monroe, a word." As the 2 men stepped aside, Lewis caught the faintest tremor in Maya's hands as she wrapped her gauze tighter. Not fear, not shock, something else, muscle memory trying to forget the heat of another fire, another day, another life. By dusk, the cleanup crews were sweeping foam residue and burnt hoses into bins. The smell of extinguishers lingered, mixing with the salt wind. Maya sat on the bench near the tool racks, her hand wrapped now in clean white gauze. She wasn't looking at anyone. Lewis approached slowly, like approaching a sleeping tiger. "You knew exactly what to do," he said. She didn't answer at first, then quietly, muscle memory. He hesitated. "From where?" She took a breath, eyes on the floor. "Somewhere we don't talk about." He didn't press, he didn't have to. A faint wind blew through the hangar, stirring the flag near the door. The sound filled the silence between them better than any words could. Later that night, the story spread across the base like wildfire. Except this time, it wasn't a rumor. It was awe. The civilian tech everyone had mocked had run into smoke before the officers had even moved. She'd called commands that weren't in any manual. She dragged a trapped airman out of a real fire. And she hadn't said a word about it. When Monroe passed her in the hall that night, his usual smirk never formed. He just said her name. Rowe. She stopped. "You saved him," he said quietly. "You saved the hangar." She shrugged lightly. "That's what training's for." "Who's training?" he asked. Her eyes met his, calm, distant, unreadable. "The kind you don't forget." Then she walked into the rain. Soft music builds, slow crescendo. Some people run from fire. Others run toward it. Not because they're fearless, but because they remember what it cost when no one did. And when the smoke clears, the world finally sees who was standing there the whole time. Quiet, scarred, and unbroken. How quiet could a base feel after fire? The next morning, Andersen Air Base didn't sound like itself. No music from the barracks, no laughter from the hangar. Even the gulls circling the airstrip seemed muted. Smoke had left its scent everywhere, in the walls, the uniforms, the coffee. The storm had passed, but the air still carried something heavier than rain. Maya walked across the tarmac before sunrise, her left hand still wrapped in gauze. She didn't wear the sling the medic had suggested. She didn't want the attention. The bandage was enough. Every step echoed in the stillness. When she reached the hangar, she stopped. The maintenance crews were already sweeping soot and scrubbing oil from the floor. No one looked up, not because they ignored her, but because they didn't know how to. Respect is quiet when it's real. Lewis was the first to speak. "Morning, ma'am." She nodded once. "Morning." He hesitated. "They're saying you saved Nguyen's life." Her eyes stayed on the aircraft. He was closest, I was fastest, that's all. He wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't that simple, but she'd already moved past him, inspecting damage. Her focus hadn't changed. Calm, steady, as if yesterday's chaos had only reminded her how to breathe. In the commander's office, the mood was less calm. Captain Monroe stood at attention, sweat glinting on his temple despite the air conditioning. Across from him, Wing Commander Doyle leaned back in his chair, reading a report. "The fire was real," Doyle said finally, voice low. "Hydraulic line rupture. Actual heat signatures, you confirm?" "Yes, sir." "And the containment?" "Civilian tech led it," Monroe admitted. Doyle's eyes lifted slowly. "You didn't lead it?" Monroe swallowed. "No, sir. He paused, searching for words that didn't sound like excuses. She reacted faster than anyone. "She." "Maya Rose, sir." Doyle set the report down, folded his hands. "Tell me something, Captain. Why wasn't her name in your last personnel review?" Monroe hesitated. "Because she's not technically under my command, contract staff, maintenance division." Doyle studied him a long moment. "You've been mocking her for weeks, haven't you?" Monroe stiffened. "With respect, sir, it was just base banter." The commander's tone turned razor-sharp. "Banter doesn't drag a man out of fire." Monroe lowered his eyes. The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally Doyle stood. "Find me her file." It took 2 hours to locate. Civilians rarely had classified records, but Maya's wasn't standard. Her personnel folder arrived in a sealed envelope stamped with a red emblem, Defense Archive access only. Doyle's adjutant placed it on his desk. "Came through Air Force Command, sir. Some of it's restricted." "Open what's not," Doyle said quietly. The folder crackled as he flipped it open. The first page was simple. R.O. Maya, former rank Staff Sergeant. Unit 160th SOAR A, Joint Task Operations. Status, honorably discharged medical. He stopped reading for a second, exhaling slowly. The 160th. The Night Stalkers. The next page told the rest. A downed helicopter, a rescue under enemy fire, 3 crewmen extracted, 1 not recovered, severe burn trauma to left hand and shoulder, commendation withheld pending classified review. No dishonor. No failure. Just silence. Doyle closed the folder gently, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts inside. By noon, rumors were wildfire again, only this time they burned differently. "Wait, she was special ops. I heard she pulled guys out of a crash. They said she got a medal, but it was sealed." No one laughed now. They whispered like kids talking about legends. Monroe didn't join in. He sat alone in the cafeteria, untouched coffee in hand, replaying the last 24 hours. Every word he'd thrown at her, every smirk, every insult. And the look in her eyes when she said, "I've done it before." He didn't feel guilt so much as realization, the kind that cuts deeper than apology. Outside, Maya worked alone. The hangar was quiet again except for tools clinking softly and rain dripping from the roof. She'd been ordered to rest. She hadn't listened. Lewis approached with 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you might want this." She looked up briefly, eyes soft but tired. "Thanks." He set 1 cup beside her, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't know you were, Special Forces." She gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Neither did they. He waited for more. When she didn't continue, he asked, "Why'd you come back? I mean to work here." Her wrench paused mid-turn. Then she said quietly, "Because I needed to be near the sound again." He frowned. The sound. The engines, the turbines. She glanced up toward the jet's underbelly. "They sound like rotors when they spool. For a few seconds it almost feels like," she trailed off, "like we made it back." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent. She tightened the final bolt, then said softer, "You don't fix ghosts, You just work beside them." Lewis didn't reply. There wasn't a right response to something like that. At 1600 hours, the base loudspeaker called for an unscheduled briefing. Every maintenance crew, pilot, and officer was required in Hangar 3. When Maya arrived, the place buzzed with tension. Rows of personnel stood at ease. The wing commander himself stood at the front, notes in hand. Her instinct told her to stay near the back. She always did. Doyle's voice carried across the space, low and deliberate. Yesterday, during a scheduled readiness exercise, a hydraulic containment line ruptured. A real emergency occurred. No casualties. A wave of relief rippled through the room. But, he continued, it could have gone very differently. He paused, scanning faces: Monroe, Lewis, the others, before his gaze settled on her. One person acted before orders, before confirmation, before protocol. They assessed, commanded, and executed, and they saved this base from a chain reaction that could have cost lives. The hangar was silent. He let that silence stretch, then said her name. Maya Rowe. Dozens of heads turned. She froze mid-breath. Doyle gestured for her to step forward, front and center. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked. The sound of her boots on concrete echoed like drumbeats. When she reached him, Doyle faced the formation. "I've read her record," he said quietly, "and I suspect few of you have. Staff Sergeant Maya Rowe, formerly of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Night Stalkers." A murmur spread through the ranks. "She was discharged after a classified rescue mission," Doyle continued, "where she extracted 2 men from a burning aircraft under enemy fire. The third didn't make it out. She did barely. The scar on her face isn't shame, it's survival." The hangar remained silent. Yesterday, she proved again what it means to act not for glory, not for rank, but for others. That's the heart of every soldier. That's the soul of every mission. He turned to her then. "Staff Sergeant, you may no longer wear the uniform, but this base stands because of you." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him she didn't deserve it, that she'd only done what anyone should have. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, Doyle turned back to the formation. "Attention," he barked. Dozens of boots snapped together. The sound cracked through the hangar like thunder. "Present arms." Every person in that hangar, officers, crew, pilots, techs, raised their hands in salute. Even Monroe, especially Monroe. For a long moment, no one breathed. The only sound was the flag outside, flapping softly against the Pacific wind. Maya didn't move. She didn't return the salute, not immediately. Her eyes glistened, jaw tight, breath trembling. Then she lifted her hand, slow, steady. Not as a soldier. As someone remembering what it felt like to be one. Doyle lowered his head slightly, respect in every line of his face. Dismissed. The sound of boots releasing echoed like rain. Afterward, no one spoke to her directly. Not yet. The kind of respect that follows truth is fragile. It needs silence to survive. Maya returned to her bench as if nothing had changed. Her hands still moved with the same calm precision. But when Lewis passed by, he noticed her coffee untouched, her shoulders just a little less tense. He didn't say anything. He just left another cup beside her. A quiet thank you for something no one else could ever repay. That night, Monroe stood alone on the flight line, wind cutting cold against his face. The sky above was full of stars, but his eyes stayed on the hangar. He thought of all the times he'd mocked her, all the moments she'd stayed silent instead of striking back. And then he thought of her crawling under fire to save one of his men. He whispered into the dark, barely audible, "I was wrong." The words vanished into the night, carried away by the wind, but somewhere inside they landed where they needed to. Soft music fades in reflective tone. Some wounds don't need revenge. They need recognition. And sometimes the quietest salute isn't from a hand raised, but from a heart that finally understands what courage looks like. What does memory sound like when it finally stops hiding? For Maya, it began with the smell. Not smoke, not this time, but engine oil and desert dust, the kind that sticks to your tongue even when you wear a mask. It had been years since the crash, yet every time the turbine spun up at Anderson, the sound pulled her backward through time, back to a place where heat shimmered like glass and the horizon burned gold. She fought the memories for years, but that night she stopped fighting. The base was quiet, the hangar lights low. Everyone else had gone. Rain whispered against the roof like distant rotor wash. Maya sat at her workbench, the smell of hydraulic fluid still clinging to her clothes. Her burned hand ached where the bandage pressed too tight. She picked up a wrench, then set it down again. Her reflection stared back from the metal scar catching the light. "You shouldn't have survived," she whispered to herself. Then she closed her eyes. And the hangar disappeared. The desert came back first. Heat, noise, the thumping heartbeat of a Black Hawk helicopter flying too low, too fast. She remembered the call sign, Raven 6. Joint Task Operation, 160th SOAR, Extraction Mission, Nightfall near Helmand Province. ETA 3 minutes, the pilot's voice crackled through the comms. Maya, then Staff Sergeant Rowe, checked her harness, eyes scanning the ridgeline ahead through NVG green. 3 minutes too long, she muttered. Beside her, Sergeant Lopez grinned, all teeth and confidence. "You worry too much, Rowe. And you don't worry enough." "Balance," he said, "that's why we work." She almost smiled, almost. The rotors roared louder. The mountains grew teeth against the darkening sky. The voice of command cut through the static. "Raven 6, you have ground resistance at the LZ. Minimal fire expected." Lopez snorted. "They always say minimal." Then came the sound that still haunted her, the first ping against the fuselage, metal singing under impact. "Taking fire," the pilot shouted. Tracer rounds ripped across the sand. Maya leaned out, returning fire, short bursts to suppress. Lopez shouted positions. Another crewman threw flares. Altitude drop, engine 2's hit. The Black Hawk lurched sideways, rotors clawing the air. Maya's world turned into chaos, sparks, heat, the smell of burning oil. Brace, brace, brace. The crash wasn't loud. It was a deep, bone-breaking silence followed by dust swallowing light. When she opened her eyes, she couldn't see. The world had become a storm of sand and smoke. Her headset crackled. "Lopez, Lopez, do you copy?" "Static." She coughed, crawled, hands searching for life. Her leg throbbed. Metal creaked above her. Then a voice. "Row over here." Lopez, pinned under debris, his left arm twisted at an impossible angle. "Hang on," she shouted, voice raw. She tried to lift the beam, muscles trembling. It didn't move. The heat bit through her gloves. "Go," Lopez wheezed. "Fuel's leaking." "Not without you." "Row, listen to me," he coughed, blood. "The others, get them out." She hesitated. Then she heard another groan from the cockpit. "The pilot." She crawled forward, lungs burning, found the pilot slumped over, unconscious. She dragged him out, then another crewman. The fuel smell grew thicker, sharper. Lopez was still alive when she came back, barely. "Go," he whispered again. "Not yet." She braced the beam with one knee, grabbed a metal rod for leverage. The heat was unbearable. Her glove caught fire first, then her sleeve. She didn't let go. The beam shifted. Lopez screamed. She pulled until it gave way. The explosion came a heartbeat later. The world vanished in white. When she woke up, the medevac lights painted everything in red and blue. Her body felt like it had been poured out of fire. Lopez was gone. They told her later she'd saved 2 men, that her burns would heal, that she'd done enough. but in her head, the only sound that ever played was his voice saying, "Go." And she hadn't gone, not fast enough. Back in the present, she opened her eyes. The rain had stopped, the hangar was still. For a long time she just sat there, breathing shallow, the weight of memory pressing on her chest. Then a sound, soft footsteps. Louis stood in the doorway holding a flashlight, couldn't sleep either. She didn't flinch, just finishing up. He stepped closer. "Commander Doyle wants to see you tomorrow, something about a commendation." She almost laughed. "They're late." He hesitated. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "everyone here knows now." Her eyes flicked up. "Knows what?" "That you're the reason we're all still here." She looked down again, jaw tightening. "That's not something I needed them to know." He frowned. "Why?" "Because knowing doesn't change anything," she said quietly. "They'll move on, they'll forget." He shook his head. "Not this time." She didn't argue, she didn't believe it. The next day, clouds broke into sunlight. At 900, she stood in Doyle's office. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You never mentioned your service record when you came aboard." "It wasn't relevant to my contract." "Maybe not, but it's relevant now." He leaned forward. "You've been living like you're still under orders, Staff Sergeant, but no one here gives them any more." She met his gaze. "With respect, sir, discipline isn't something you turn off." He nodded slowly. "You're right." He opened a folder on his desk, not the one from yesterday, but a new one. Inside was a single document, stamped in blue. "I've filed a commendation request," he said, "for bravery during the containment incident, and for distinguished service prior to discharge." She didn't reach for it. "Why now?" "Because silence shouldn't erase sacrifice." The words hit harder than he knew. She exhaled. "Sir, what if I don't want recognition?" He smiled faintly. "Then consider it a message to everyone else instead." Outside, word spread again, but this time it wasn't rumor. It was story. The kind that travels slower, deeper. The kind that changes people. In the mess hall, Monroe overheard a young pilot telling a new recruit, "You see her? That's Roe. She ran into fire when the rest of us were frozen." No mockery, just awe. Monroe said nothing. He didn't need to. He'd already made his choice. That evening, as the sun fell behind the Pacific, Maya sat near the runway, her burned hand resting against her knee. The sound of turbines filled the air, 100 metallic hearts beating in rhythm. Louis approached quietly. "Commander said you're off the roster for a few days. Rest time." She didn't move. "Rest feels like guilt." He frowned. "Why?" "Because every time I stop," she said softly, "I hear it again, the crash, the voices." He sat beside her, silent for a while. Then, "You ever think Lopez would have wanted you to stop hearing it?" She looked at him, really looked. "You know his name." "I read the report." For the first time in years, her expression broke. Pain, gratitude, memory. "He told me to go," she whispered. "I didn't. I thought I could save him." Louis shook his head. "You did save him, just not the way you think." She blinked, confused. "You carried him here," he said. "Every time you fix something, every time you keep someone safe, that's him. That's what survivors do." The wind carried their silence for a while. Then she whispered, "It's hard to forgive yourself when the world salutes you for what you couldn't finish." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sound of another jet taking off filled the moment, a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. She closed her eyes and listened. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't hurt. It sounded like continuation, not punishment. That night Monroe found her outside Hangar 12, sitting under the stars. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood beside her, hands in his pockets. Finally he spoke. "Ro, I owe you an apology." She didn't look up. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," he said quietly. "You were right about this place. About what it means to keep it running. I made it about pride. You made it about people. She glanced at him, eyes soft. It's easier to mock what we don't understand. He gave a faint, rueful laugh. Guess I proved that. They stood in silence. He said finally, You're coming back tomorrow, right? She smiled, a real, faint, almost invisible smile. Wouldn't know what to do anywhere else. Soft music, rising, reflective tone. Some scars are not reminders of weakness. They are signatures, proof that we were there, that we fought, that we refused to disappear. And sometimes, the people who walk alone aren't lonely. They're just carrying the weight others dropped. How fast can peace turn back into noise? Faster than the blink of a warning light. A week after the commendation, Andersen Air Base had started to breathe again. The laughter had returned, lighter this time, free of the edges it once carried. Pilots pre-flighted jets, ground crews joked, even Monroe cracked a smile once or twice. Only Maya stayed the same. Quiet, precise, watching. She didn't crave their respect. She just didn't know what to do with it. Every salute still felt heavy. Every thank you reminded her of a name carved into sand half a world away. That morning, the sky was impossibly blue, the kind that looks peaceful until you remember how quickly blue turns to smoke. The hangar doors stood open, sunlight cutting long lines across the floor. Inside, Monroe briefed the team. Today's test flight is routine, he said, voice firm. EGI system upgrade, diagnostic only, no live weapons. He glanced at her. Rowe, you did the calibration. You'll monitor from ground control. She nodded, copy that. Lewis smirked faintly. Guess we'll actually make it home for lunch. Don't jinx it, she said, half serious. By noon, the jet was ready. F-15C tail number 427, the same one that had nearly burned a week ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The pilot was Lieutenant Harris, confident but new, the kind who believed checklists were optional if you had swagger. From the control bay, Maya watched him strap in. She checked telemetry, oxygen, fuel flow, sensor output, all green. Doyle entered quietly, folding his arms behind her. You sure it's stable? She nodded, every number's clean. Good, he said, then softer, let's keep it that way. Engines roared to life. The sound filled the hangar, shaking the glass. Harris taxied onto the runway, sunlight flashing off the canopy. Control, this is Eagle 427, ready for test sequence. Copy 427, Maya replied. You're clear for takeoff. The jet thundered forward, wheels leaving Earth in a spray of dust and heat. Everyone watched it climb, a silver blade cutting through blue. For a while, everything was perfect. Altitude steady. Vectors clean. Telemetry smooth. Then at 12:47, something shifted. A single tone, sharp, high-pitched, unmistakable. Control, I'm getting a hydraulic fluctuation warning. Maya's eyes darted across screens. Confirming now, check secondary. Static crackled. Then secondary spiking. Pressure dropped 50%. She froze. That sound, that warning tone. She'd heard it before. Harris disengaged flight assist, switched to manual. I'm trying, response is sluggish. Hydraulic line B may be blocked, she said rapidly. You'll lose rudder control in 30 seconds. Trim right, level your yaw, bleed altitude. Her voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. Calm, exact. Monroe leaned closer. We can call abort. She shook her head. Too late for that. Control, I can't hold level. She's rolling. Harris, she said, listen to me. Kill thrust to 70%. Keep your wings flat. Don't fight it, compensate. I'm losing it. Then trust the fall, she said sharply. Let gravity do half the work. The room went dead silent. Monroe stared at her as she commanded like she'd never left the cockpit. Altitude dropping, 3,800. Deploy flaps manually, she ordered. Bypass the servo. You'll feel resistance push through it. I thought this was your calibration. It is, she snapped, which means I know exactly how much force it takes. He obeyed, the warning tone cut mid-scream. Stabilizing, he gasped. Okay, it's leveling. She exhaled slowly. Maintain 1,500 altitude and circle base. We'll guide you in. Copy that, Harris said, voice shaking. Monroe looked at her like he'd never seen her before. How the hell did you? She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the screen, watching every flicker of data like it was a heartbeat she refused to lose again. 15 minutes later, the jet landed. The tires hit the tarmac in a shower of sparks and smoke, but it stayed upright. When it stopped, Harris sat trembling in the cockpit. He didn't speak. He just stared ahead, hands shaking until the canopy lifted. Maya was already there, climbing the ladder before anyone could stop her. She leaned into the cockpit. You're all right, she said softly. He turned toward her, eyes wide. I thought I was dead. Not today. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Back inside the hangar, Monroe paced. The crew swarmed the jet, running checks. Doyle approached quietly. What happened? Hydraulic relay failure again, Monroe said. Different line. She caught it before it went catastrophic. Doyle nodded slowly. She always does. He watched her standing by the ladder, hair blown loose by wind, face streaked with grime and light. She wasn't supposed to be here, he murmured. Monroe frowned. Sir. She was supposed to be gone years ago, Doyle said softly. People like her don't come back from what she saw, but she did. Monroe looked down. I think she never left, sir. Later, when the chaos settled, Maya sat alone on the tarmac. Her body trembled with leftover adrenaline. Her burned hand ached where she'd gripped the railing too hard. Lewis joined her quietly, holding 2 water bottles. You did it again, he said. She laughed once hollow. Or maybe I caused it again. He shook his head. Don't start that. She looked away. Same warning tone, same failure type. You think that's coincidence? Yeah, he said, because this time nobody died. Her silence lingered too long. He sat beside her. You can't keep living in that crash. Her voice barely rose. It's not living, it's remembering. He looked at her steady. Then remember this instead, you just kept another pilot alive. Maybe that's the universe giving you one back. Her eyes glistened. You believe in that? He smiled faintly. I believe in you. She almost smiled, the kind of smile that hides tears. That evening the base gathered again, unplanned. The test flight had rattled everyone. But when Harris walked into the mess hall, alive and upright, a cheer broke out. He crossed the room straight to Maya, stopped, saluted. Thank you, ma'am. She looked stunned. You don't salute civilians. Then I'm doing it wrong, he said simply. She didn't respond, just nodded once and turned away before anyone saw her eyes. Later, Doyle found her outside near the fence line, watching the runway lights flicker against the sea. Hell of a day, he said. She didn't look at him. Every day's a test flight, sir. Some just make it obvious. He smiled faintly. You ever think about coming back? Instructor's slot just opened. We could use someone who doesn't panic under pressure. She shook her head slowly. No, sir, my time's done. He studied her for a long moment. You sure? She nodded. Soldiers fight, mechanics build. I think it's time I built things that keep people from fighting. Doyle chuckled softly. That's the best kind of soldier. He started to walk away, then paused. Row. Yes, sir. He turned slightly. Lopez would be proud. Her breath caught. He didn't wait for her response. He just kept walking. The wind carried his words like a flag through the night. When she was alone again, she let the silence settle. The stars above looked like the same ones she'd stared at over Afghanistan, only colder, quieter, forgiven somehow. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she didn't see fire. She saw light, clean, white, endless. She whispered, "You'd have liked this one, Lopez." A tear slipped free, then another, not pain. Relief. The next morning, Monroe found her at dawn, sitting near the jets, coffee steaming beside her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She smiled faintly, didn't want to miss the sunrise. He hesitated. "We're doing another systems test next week. I want you on the control team, officially." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," he said. "You keep saving our asses, might as well make it policy." She laughed quietly. "Guess we're learning balance." He grinned. "That's why we work." Her smile froze. The words hit her like a ghost touching her shoulder. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. Soft music, rising reflective tone. Some storms don't come to destroy. They come to reveal who can still stand in the wind. And when the engine's quiet, when the smoke clears, sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is learn to live again. When the storm hit, no one was ready. Not for the rain, not for the wind, and certainly not for what it brought with it. It began as a weather warning, high winds over the Pacific, moderate flooding predicted for the coastal perimeter. Nothing new, nothing threatening. By noon, the warnings changed. Category 4, direct trajectory, impact in 6 hours. Andersen Air Base moved fast, emergency lockdown procedures, aircraft relocation, crew rotation. Every system they had went into motion. But as the storm built, so did the chaos. The backup generators failed in 2 hangars. The civilian housing area lost power. And then came the worst of it, a distress call from a nearby village. Flooding, dozens stranded, power lines down. Doyle stared at the transmission in silence. The storm was already pounding against the windows like a drumline of war. "Search and rescue can't deploy in this wind," Monroe said, jaw tight. "We'd lose the choppers." "Then we send ground vehicles," Doyle said. "Sir, the roads are already under." "I said send them." But the radar tech shook his head. "Convoys are blocked. Mudslide took out Route 3. We've got people out there with no signal, no way to reach them." The room went still. And then Maya spoke. "There's a way," she said quietly. Everyone turned. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp, alive in a way no one had seen before. "Old service roads along the ridge. They're narrow but passable if we use light transport, Humvees, not trucks. We can ride the high ground until the flood drops." Monroe frowned. "Those roads aren't mapped." "They don't need to be," she said. "I built the nav models when this base was commissioned." Doyle met her gaze. "You're saying you can lead a convoy through that storm?" She didn't blink. "Yes, sir." He paused. "Take who you need." The rain was horizontal now, a curtain of water slicing the world into noise and motion. Maya climbed into the lead Humvee, headset crackling. Lewis took the passenger seat, knuckles white around the dashboard. Monroe was in the second vehicle, 4 men behind him, headlights ghostly in the dark. "Convoy check-in," Maya said. "All units green," Monroe replied. "Stay tight," she ordered. "We don't turn back once we start." The engines roared to life. The convoy pushed out of the base, into the storm. Visibility was near zero. The road was a river. Wind rocked the vehicles like toys. Lewis yelled over the noise, "You sure this path still exists?" She squinted through the windshield. "It existed the last time I used it." "When was that?" 8 years ago." He stared at her. "You're insane." "Probably," she said, voice steady. The Humvee climbed the incline, tires slipping in mud, water splashing over the hood. The ridge loomed ahead, dark, jagged, alive with lightning. Behind them, Monroe's voice came over comms. Visibility dropping. We've lost the trail. Follow my beacon, Maya said, flipping a switch. The convoy lights synced to her vehicle. One by one, they fell into line. Convoy, hold speed. Watch the right flank, that drop is 70 feet. The wind screamed against the glass. Lewis muttered, "You sure we're not flying right now?" "Feels like it," she said. 20 minutes later, the ridge flattened out. Below them, faint through the sheets of rain, they could see the village, half submerged, roofs barely visible, floodlights flickering through fog. "Damn," Monroe breathed. "Stay on comms," Maya ordered. "We'll park at the high edge and move on foot." When they dismounted, the world felt like a different planet. The sound of rain like static, the wind like an animal. "Team Alpha, North Quadrant," she shouted. "Lewis, you're with me. We take the lower homes." Monroe frowned. "Row, those are underwater." "Exactly," she said, already moving. They waded into waist-deep floodwater, the cold hitting like knives. The current pulled at their legs. "Over here," a voice screamed from somewhere in the dark. Maya turned her flashlight. A roof half submerged, two children clinging to it, their mother beside them. "Lewis." He tossed her a rope. She tied it around her waist and plunged forward. The current caught her, nearly knocking her under, but she pushed through, boots sliding against unseen debris. "Hold on," she yelled. She reached the roof, pulled the first child close, wrapped the rope around them both. Pull. Lewis and Monroe hauled from the ridge. The line strained, snapped once, then held. She got them across one by one, the mother last. By the time she reached shore, her face was pale, her hands shaking. "You good?" Monroe asked. She nodded, breathless. "One more house, eastern side." He grabbed her arm. "Row, that area's gone." She looked up. The wind ripped at her soaked hair, rain streaming down her face. "Then that's where someone still is." They found him 15 minutes later, an old man trapped inside a collapsed structure, one leg pinned. Water rising fast. Maya tried to lift the beam. It didn't move. Lewis moved to help. "We need another." The structure groaned. The current surged. "We're out of time," Monroe shouted. Maya looked at the old man. "I'm not leaving you." His voice was weak. "Go save yourselves." She clenched her jaw. "That's not how this works." She looped the rope again, tied it to a metal pole, braced her feet, and pulled. Her burned hand screamed with pain, but she didn't stop. The beam shifted just enough. Lewis dove in, grabbed the man's shoulders, and together they dragged him out. As the structure collapsed behind them, the surge hit, a wall of water pushing them off their feet. Maya went under. Cold darkness, the roar of the current. For a heartbeat, she was back in the desert, flames instead of water, the smell of fuel instead of rain. Go, Lopez's voice echoed in her head. "Not this time." She kicked, fought upward, lungs burning, broke the surface. Lewis grabbed her arm, hauling her to the ridge. They collapsed together, gasping. The old man coughed, alive. "Count," she rasped. "Everyone accounted for." Monroe's voice over comms. "All civilians recovered, convoy intact." Maya lay back in the mud, rain washing her face clean. This time, when the thunder rolled, it didn't sound like explosions. It sounded like applause. They made it back to base 6 hours later, exhausted, freezing, alive. The entire hangar was waiting, medics, ground crew, Doyle himself. When Maya stepped out of the Humvee, covered in mud and blood and rain, silence fell. Doyle approached, rain dripping off his cap. "Everyone made it." "Yes, sir." He looked around. "You led them through that storm." She shook her head. "We led each other." He smiled faintly. "You ever going to take credit for anything?" "Not if I can help it," she said. The debrief that followed was brief. No medals, no speeches. Just a report. But the story spread again. this time faster, stronger, carried not by rumor but by pride. They stopped calling her the quiet civilian. They started calling her Chief Rowe. Unofficial title, unofficial respect. But the kind that actually matters. Later that night, after the storm finally broke, Maya walked alone along the runway. The air smelled of wet earth and jet fuel. The stars were out again, sharp and clear. Lewis caught up with her. "You did it again," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "We all did." He hesitated. "I saw you go under, thought we lost you." "You almost did. Why didn't you let us pull you back sooner?" She looked at him, eyes calm. "Because I needed to know I still could." He frowned. "Still could what?" "Fight the current." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was peace, the kind earned drop by drop. Soft music, rising emotional tone. Some people survive fire. Some survive water. But the hardest to survive is memory. And when the storm comes again, when the world forgets who you were, you remember that courage doesn't fade. It only changes shape. When the sky finally cleared, Andersen Air Base didn't look the same. The storm had washed the world clean, hangars gleaming under sunlight, puddles shimmering like mirrors, the flag snapping proudly in the ocean wind. It was quiet but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that follows understanding. The kind Maya had lived her whole life waiting for. 3 days after the rescue, the base gathered again. No orders this time, no announcements, just people showing up, unspoken, unplanned. Ground crews, pilots, civilians. Even the mess hall staff stopped working and came out to the runway. They didn't come for medals. They came for her. She didn't want the attention, but Doyle insisted. "You don't have to say anything," he'd told her. "Just stand there." Now, standing in front of them, Maya felt more exposed than she had in any firefight. Wind tugged at her jacket. The sun burned off the last of the storm clouds. Doyle stepped forward holding a small case, not the kind for medals or ribbons but a service plaque, simple, unadorned. "This base," he began, voice steady, "owes its safety to many hands. Mechanics who work through the night, pilots who fly when the weather says don't, medics, engineers, cleaners, cooks, every person who keeps the line between chaos and order." He turned slightly, eyes on her. "But some people don't just keep that line, they are that line." The wind stilled. "She came here under contract," he continued. "No uniform, no rank, no command. And yet when it mattered, when systems failed, when fires burned, when storms rose, she didn't wait for permission. She acted." He paused, not out of duty, out of instinct, out of something deeper. He turned toward her fully. "Maya Rowe, Staff Sergeant, veteran, survivor, builder, this base stands because of people like you. People who don't shout about honor, they just live it." He handed her the plaque. It was small, brushed steel, engraved with only 6 words. "For strength shown in silence, Andersen AFB." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she said softly, "Sir, it wasn't just me." "I know," Doyle said. "That's why it matters." Applause started slow. Then spread. Not thunderous, not chaotic, rhythmic, respectful, unified. The sound of hands clapping in unison, echoing off the hangars and over the field. Maya lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. When she finally looked up again, she saw faces she once avoided, men who had mocked her scar, pilots who'd whispered behind her back. Now they were all standing. No laughter. No pity. Just acknowledgement. She nodded once. That was all the thanks she'd ever needed. After the crowd dispersed, she stood alone by the runway, plaque still in her hand. Monroe approached quietly. "Looks like they finally caught up to you." She smiled faintly. "Took them long enough." He glanced at the plaque. "You're leaving it here, aren't you?" "Probably." "Why?" She looked at the sky so blue it hurt to stare. Because it belongs here, not with me. He studied her. You know, I used to think being a commander meant giving orders, but after watching you, it's more about listening. She looked at him, eyes warm. Then maybe you'll be a good one someday. He chuckled, working on it. Lewis found her later in the hangar, sitting on the floor beside her old bench, polishing a wrench. You could take a break, you know, he said. I am, she replied. He laughed, you never stop. She shrugged, work makes the noise quiet. He nodded. The convoy team's talking about painting your name on one of the Humvees. She groaned softly, please don't. Too late, he grinned. They already picked the color. She rolled her eyes but smiled. What color? Scarlet. She looked down, touched the edge of her scar unconsciously. Fitting, she murmured. That evening, as the sun melted into the Pacific, Doyle found her near the perimeter fence again, same place she always ended up. You're heading out soon, he asked. She nodded, tomorrow morning. Back to the city. Maybe, haven't decided. You could stay, he said, permanent post, engineering division. She smiled, gentle, grateful. Thank you, sir, but I think it's time. Time for what? She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the sky touched the sea, to stop running from silence. Doyle studied her a moment, then quietly. You know, when I first saw you, I thought you were broken. She raised an eyebrow. That's reassuring. He chuckled. I was wrong, you weren't broken. You were rebuilding, just took me too long to see it. She looked back at him, voice soft. Sometimes rebuilding hurts more than breaking. He nodded, yeah, but the result's stronger. They stood there together, not speaking for a long time. Just the ocean, the wind, the steady hum of engines far down the runway. Later that night, she packed her tools. Everything she owned fit into one small duffel. No medals. No photos. Just one folded napkin, the same kind she used to sketch wiring diagrams on, now covered in faint pencil lines of a helicopter, drawn from memory. She slipped it into her bag and closed the zipper. Outside, the floodlights hummed softly, painting the runway in pale gold. She walked toward the fence one last time. There, hanging from the chain link, was her plaque. Someone had already mounted it there, right where the wind could catch the reflection. For strength shone in silence. She smiled, guess they beat me to it. She left it there. Before dawn, she stopped by the hangar one last time. The jets slept under the floodlights, silver wings folded like resting birds. She walked past her workbench, touched the edge of the table, then looked up at the aircraft she'd saved twice. Fly straight, she whispered. Her voice barely rose above the hum of the lights, but it carried, the way only truth carries. As she turned to leave, Lewis appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured you'd come by, he said. She smiled, you figured right. He handed her a cup, where to next? Wherever they still need fixing, she said. He nodded slowly, you'll come back. She glanced around the hangar one last time. If the engines ever sound wrong again, maybe. He tried to hide the emotion in his voice. You'll be missed. She gave a small smile. Then I guess I did something right. Outside, the sun began to rise. Gold poured across the runway, turning every puddle into fire. She paused halfway down the tarmac, watching the light crawl across the planes, the hangars, the flag. She reached up and traced her scar once more. It didn't hurt anymore. In that moment, she realized the truth she'd been running from for years. Her scar wasn't a reminder of what she'd lost. It was proof she'd survived and kept going. That was her uniform now. That was her medal. As she walked toward the gate, Monroe's voice came over the loudspeaker, not formal, not rehearsed. Attention, all units, stand by for departure salute. She froze, stunned. Then slowly, as the morning light spread, figures emerged along the runway: mechanics, pilots, medics, cooks, every rank, every age. They lined the path, side by side, silent. And then, as one, they saluted. No music. No orders. Just respect. She didn't turn at first. She didn't trust her voice. When she finally did, her eyes glistened. She raised her hand, one last time. The same gesture she'd made to a flag years ago in another world. This time not for orders, not for rank. For peace. For memory. For all the voices that couldn't raise theirs anymore. The moment held, suspended in light and wind. Then she lowered her hand and walked on. Soft music, final reflective tone. They mocked her scar once. Called it failure, called it mistake. But scars are not symbols of weakness. They are stories the skin refuses to forget. Proof that healing happened. And when the world salutes the quiet ones, it's not for their silence. It's for the storms they walked through. And the dignity they never lost. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.